take it away.
All right, looks like we're sharing the screen, and so hopefully y'all can see that all right. This is a presentation that Ryan and I gave back in February for the Tornado Operations and Training Summit, and it's not really that new of an idea. Essentially, this is kind of our take on how we're going to apply subject matter expertise in our offices. I'd say it's not really a new idea, and I'm going to start this by stealing an analogy that I saw Kevin Laws give probably close to 10 years ago, based on some practices that he's been doing down in his office in Birmingham. So again, I gave this at TOTS. This is a meeting we held in St. Louis, and if there's one thing you know about the city that I'm from, St. Louis, it's very likely the St. Louis Cardinals. So at the end of his career, Albert Pujols, one of the greatest hitters in Major League Baseball, the Cardinals brought him back for one season to be a designated hitter, or literally an expert batter. And for the most part, that's all he did that season. The Cardinals put him in a position to succeed, and he excelled. At 42 years old, which is pretty old for a professional athlete, he hit 24 home runs, pushing him over 700 for his career and into fourth place all time. He did really, really well that season. However, there were situations where he was away from his area of expertise, and the results were not great. They had him pitch at one point. In a game they were up big, they had him try to steal bases, and that just didn't go so well. Now, like anything else, it's inevitable that a baseball player ends up in situations where they're not experts. But generally, the Cardinals only deployed Albert as a hitter, and that helped propel them into the playoffs in his last season in the MLB. I won't talk about the fact that that's the last time that the Cardinals were in the playoffs, but hopefully we can, well, it doesn't look great that we're going to fix it anytime soon, but that's neither here nor there. So hopefully it's not too hard to see how this relates to convective warnings, but two primary questions come to mind when we're talking about it. And I talk about convective warnings again because this presentation was part of TOTS. We're really focused on tornado warnings and things like that, but this can be applied to multiple areas of operations. But for convective warnings specifically, the questions are, when the game is on the line for our WFOs and we're expecting to issue high impact, high visibility convective warnings, are we doing everything we can to ensure that our expert hitters, or for us, expert warning meteorologists, are getting those at bats? And to continue the analogy, are we doing everything that we can to ensure that we're not asking our pitchers or our experts in other areas with perhaps more limited warning capabilities to take these at bats? So I think these are questions that at most offices we at least are thinking about, and they're at least in some way going into our decision-making process of how we're positioning people. But there's often barriers to getting people in the right places. Of course, the schedule's the elephant in the room. What if your experts are on mids and you're expecting an afternoon outbreak? Or if your expert's on a vacation? Or what if you've got multiple windows for severe weather over a short period of time? How can you possibly deal with that? What if the person putting together your staffing plan is new to the office and doesn't know where your office's expertise lies? Or what if your office doesn't have any experts in these various different subject or areas of expertise? These are, of course, questions that every office has got to grapple with, and there's multiple ways to deal with it. So for the rest of this talk, Ryan and I are going to describe the different ways that his office in Louisville and my office here in St. Louis are tackling this issue. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ryan to talk about what they're doing in Louisville.
Okay, thanks, Ben. The reason that he and I sort of tag teamed on this talk in the first place was we had our Southeast Sioux sub-regional meeting, I think it was November of 2023, and we both realized that we were doing similar things back when we were trying to get this idea started. This was even before the Kevin Laws talk. We were talking about the ways that we were going to try to work things out in our various offices. If you want to go to the next slide, then. So back at the beginning of fiscal year 24, John Gordon, the MIC at the time, we actually got him down to a few top goals for the office. It was kind of interesting because in years past, he would have a top 10, before that a top 20, and each of the individual goals would have a sub point that would be like 2 or 3 sub points. So it ended up being more like a top 100. And we got him to focus down, and we said, okay, for fiscal year 24, tornado genesis training was the Sioux team, our #1 goal, basically. The other things were other parts of the office that we were going to try to get done. And so we put together a sort of a refresher timeline that got us into the idea of getting back to tornado genesis every month or so, maybe at least every other month, where we would have various training refreshers. We would have talks. We would have people come into the office and give brown bags. You see on there, Randy Bowers, he did some great exercises that were like mini West cases that we could do on GR2. And so we were able to use mutual aid there to get other offices and the projects that they were doing to help us out. And you can see some of the CWIP strategies, trying to spread that out throughout the year, getting our staff to look at things at various times of the year. And out of that, go to the next slide. I mentioned the talks that we had. We had these bi-monthly talks. And what we would do is we would invite our neighboring offices to be able to sit in on those talks and just be a part of the same things that we're trying to learn. So we had Cam Nixon on there to show some of the ideas that he's been looking at for tornado genesis, including cell mergers and the direction that those cell mergers come in. Or it could be, I did a talk once going back over some GR2 updates back when we had the first where you could put in your own user selections for things you can see in GR2. So I showed off how that worked in February and March, I believe it was of 2024, for some warnings that I had to issue and just the successes that I had. But then John heard a talk at the Southeast, I don't know what CAP stands for, CCAPS, down there in Mobile, Alabama. He went on his own time and he heard Kevin Laws, the Sioux at Birmingham, give a talk on the tornado stats that they have for their office. And he was just enthralled by it. He talked about the 4 different torpedoes of tornado warnings in a given office. And we thought, well, how can we make that work here at our office? I mean, this stuff sounded great. And all the things that he suggested were things that we thought we could do here at Louisville. But if you go to the next slide, we had to make that fit for our office. We didn't have the same number of staff that Birmingham did. They have a lot. Well, maybe they don't have now. I don't know how everything has changed in the last few months. But they had a lot of extra meteorologists. So some of the initial pushback was we can't do the same model that they have there because we don't have the same number of staff. And then how do we go through determining who the experts are in our office? Who's going to be the ones that issue the warnings? Who's going to be the ones that work on mesoanalysis, providing DSS, doing the event coordination? Will we be able to get our office to buy into what we're trying to sell here? And then when do we implement it? So go on to the next. We had a bunch of brainstorming breakfasts, John and I. We would include some of the other forecasters in the office that were part of the Sioux team to be able to think about it. And we're leaning towards implementing this plan that we had if we had an SPC 2% tornado threat, which, you know, if you look back at some of the stuff you can get from the IEM Cal database, that map there on the bottom right shows how often do you have a day 1 or even day 2 convective outlook? I think it was day 2. Can't read my tiny writing. At least for this, it looks like day 1 of at least a 2% tornado threat. And you see the orange color there in central Kentucky says anywhere between about 20 and 25 days a year, you'd be in a 2% tornado threat. So maybe not quite as often as you would think or expect. And obviously you go a little bit farther west, you have that happening more often. And even in eastern Kentucky, it drops off very quickly for those in the Jackson office. So out of these brainstorming breakfasts, we put together a Google form and we asked our staff to fill out a survey. What are your interests as far as if you were to be on a radar team? Are you really interested in a meso team? And then we also asked our lead forecasters and the other managers to provide similar input for each of the forecast staff. So we can try to match up the ideas that people like doing with, are they really good at doing that? And we looked at some other things too, as far as radar warning stats that we've been keeping over the years. The second survey there was seen only by the MIC. So that he sort of ingested that, and we wanted to make sure that it was anonymous so that if people were giving feedback for the rest of the staff, it was totally anonymous there. Go to the next one, Ben. So hopefully you can read some of this. If not, you can go back and look at the recording a little bit later of these slides that we're going to share. But the first survey we asked, how proficient do you feel at each of these potential roles in a convective environment? And so we actually did split up between QLCSs and supercells. We didn't make that in the final determination as far as a separate goal, but you did see somebody there that said they're an expert at QLCS tornadoes. I feel skilled, and so I was one of those red bars when I did the survey. But we had some that just were neutral. They didn't feel very confident with it. You go over to being an event coordinator. We had somebody that said, no, I don't want to do that. We had two people that said, no, I don't want to do that. So it was easy for us to be able to go through and sort of filter out who we didn't want in certain environments if they were uncomfortable. And then the second question there, this was for our anonymous survey. No, it's still for this one. How proficient or how willing are you to serve on these teams? And we had, the pick me choice, and those were the obvious ones to be able to go through. And then please no, again, that goes back to the event coordinator as an option. So next slide. Back when we first set this up, we asked the question, do we have the staffing to be able to handle these roles? That's changed a little bit, and I'll show you what our current makeup is, or what it was a couple months ago, and how we have to deal with that. What happens if we have a prolonged northwest flow event? Are we going to be able to maintain the staffing at those levels? Well, we had an event come April 2nd through the weekend of the 5th, 6th, I think it was. We definitely had a prolonged event, and we tried to focus on when we thought the severe threat was. We had a flood threat for a lot of it, and we had a couple periods within there with some severe threat. The other comments we got were, can we update this yearly? Can people come and go, and maybe, we have somebody that leaves, which we did. Maybe we can have other people change up in that. We wanted to make sure we had clear thresholds for when these roles were filled. And then we also asked, hey, can we do some kind of postmortem afterward? Can we get an office team to do that? We haven't had much progress on that front because of the staffing levels and just how busy we've been getting transitions going on. But if you go to the next slide, we did put together our teams. We had a team lead, which typically was a lead forecaster who was in charge of each of the teams, or a manager that was there. So you see we had a radar warning operator team, mesoanalyst, social media comms, DSS, short-term forecaster aviation team, hydro team, event coordinator, and then for after the fact, we had a survey team. We had primary team members and then secondary team members. We really focused the training for the primary people, but we wanted to make sure that the secondaries are somewhat fresh on these roles. If you go to the next slide. So by doing that sort of team lead, you got some extra buy-in there, because it's similar to an ICS structure. They were the span of control for the managers, that we could just talk to the team leads and see how their teams are doing. And we got various training done by those team leads. Event coordinator training, Tom Ray and Brian Schuttmer put that together. Mesoanalysis training, Mark Jarvis put that together for us. And radar case training, I've been working on that. I was able to do some cases using the new RSIC that came from TJ Turnage, and I've been getting better and better at that. But it's been good cases that we've been able to share, even as part of the Southeast Sioux group. And as you can see on the upper right, we had we put out some initial thoughts on what we thought each team should do as far as having a goal. Radar warning operator team had the most things to deal with, because there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot of new tools to look at. And we have our forecast matrix. We actually set up a separate training track for each of the roles, and you see the completion statistics in there, and when we wanted to have these things done. This is a little bit of an older map, but so that's there. And then moving forward, if you want to move to the next slide. Again, there's that ICS manager structure. We had our presentations just for the individual teams at our recent severe weather roundtable, where we had updates from each team about what they were doing. And we continue to have mutual aid. We continue to have these SIMs coming from others in the Southeast Sioux group. Ben and Jason Schauman put together a good training on a supercell and a QLCS case. And again, Randy Bowers had updated some more of his mini cases that we were able to use. we had a good discussion between our radar team members about a warning strategy for a QLCS that went through Birmingham and Jackson's areas. And you could see the difference in the way that warnings were issued between those two offices. And it wasn't necessarily good or bad one way or the other. We saw pros and cons from each. And we talked about that as a radar team. And part of what came out of that discussion was, hey, ahead of a big event coming through here, let's have a strategy of how we're going to issue warnings. And so that was interesting. And that was back in October, November when we were setting this up. Finally, we had, after a quiet period of weather, we had a case back in early February. And that's what's showing up here on the animation and then the warnings that we had issued. We had several rotating cells. We issued tornado warnings. Here in this case, you don't see a tornado warning issued on the bottom right. But we had restraint in issuing some of those. We did end up issuing a few tornado warnings, not as many as we would normally have, thanks to the fact that we were able to have this training, this constant training. And we had only one-minute tornado that came out of that case on the ground for 1 minute. I believe it was an EF1, the damage that it caused. But the fact that we did sort of have a hot wash after this, because we were asking, why did we not get tornadoes out of this? Can we look at the data and figure these things out? And we actually involved Cam Nixon on it because of his cell merger idea. He was talking about the inflow region for these supercells and how it may not be ingesting the right kind of air mass to be able to get that supercell tornado to produce a tornado on the ground. And it was that lead tornado in the box in the upper right, the bottom right, that lead rotating cell there that did produce that 1 minute tornado on the ground, because it briefly snuck into a little bit better air mass and then it snuck back out of it. And so that was the reason. And then more recently than these cases, we had another one, April 2nd, 3rd, where we had really good discussion and ops after the fact, because the east side of Louisville had an EF3 tornado. And if you look at the mesoanalysis data, it did not seem like our environment supported that strong of a tornado. But you can't argue with the damage. The damage, I got to see it myself. It definitely was in that low end EF3 range, if only very briefly, for what happened there. So those are the metrics that we're looking for. We want to have fewer cases where we have to ask, why didn't we issue a tornado warning? Why did we miss this event? We didn't want to ask those questions quite as often. So that's the way we do things at Louisville. It's been a struggle with the reduced staffing, but even with that, with these most recent events, we've tried to make sure that we got a radar person on radar, a meso person on meso, and try to deal with what we have. So I'll transfer it back over to Ben.
All right, thanks, Ryan. So switching over to what we've been doing here in St. Louis, we approached it a little bit differently, a bit more holistically for the whole office, not just on severe convection, but essentially we wanted to identify, develop, and deploy experts across all operational areas that our office deals with. So essentially trying to get away from that jack of all trades model that we've had for so long, that I know kind of us Sioux feel especially stretched thin by, and really focusing people in on what it is they're interested in. And so to help kind of do that, we identified two goals. The first one is to foster and develop employees' raw motivation and talent to build expertise. So the idea here is that people already have areas that they're passionate about and have developed expertise in. And so what we want to do is facilitate an expansion of that expertise, and then also put together a pathway for people desiring to develop that expertise to become a subject matter expert. And then the second goal is to strategically utilize subject matter experts in operations to increase the probability of success. And essentially that's the title of this talk, right? We want to make sure that we've got the right people in the right place. And ultimately we feel like this is what's going to lead our office to success. And so a couple of examples, let's say it's a typical spring fire weather day and our fire weather expert's on an X shift. Well, that's a pretty easy one. We can rope him into operations to ensure we're making the best forecast we can, make the appropriate headline decisions, we're contacting the appropriate partners, things like that. Maybe something a little bit more complicated, we're in a day 3 slight risk with a 5% chance for tornadoes, and we see that our severe weather expert is scheduled to be off on day 3, but is scheduled to work a day shift on day 4. Maybe there's a way we can allow that expert to switch his shifts so he can come in on day 3 instead of day 4, just looking for ways to do that. And so what we've done, and this is a project that we've been working on, shoot, for probably about two or 3 years now, is trying to identify these areas in which subject matter experts are needed. And so we have come up with actually 16 areas. 8 of them are what we're calling operational, and then 8 of them are in support. And we've really been focusing on the areas of operational expertise. The ones that you see highlighted in blue here are ones that we have completed, and we've actually also completed fire weather recently on this. But you can see we're focusing on things like severe warnings, severe forecasting, IDSS, winter weather, the things where we're really looking for ways we can deploy our experts in. So once we've got those areas identified, the next step is to develop a tiered expertise framework with tiers ranging from novice to expert. And what we tried to do is come up with pretty specific definitions for what those mean. Generally, what these mean is a novice is going to be meteorologists that are actively training to achieve proficiency in a given subject matter. And so this tier typically encompasses your GS 5, 7, 9s, and in some instances 11s. Proficient is what we expect all GS 12 meteorologists to be. So this is, at least as our staffing model stands, we can't completely get away from the jack of all trades method. Everybody's got to be able to issue convective warnings, for example. And so meteorologists must meet the minimum GS 12 standards as defined in their performance plan to be considered proficient in a subject matter area. Advanced individuals are as determined by existing experts, and the SUE meteorologists who choose to gain advanced expertise will follow subject-specific paths to this tier. And then finally, expert, that's again as determined by existing experts in the SUE. Meteorologists who choose to become expert in a subject will develop their knowledge base and experience to this tier. And so I'm going to focus this a little bit, and we're just going to talk about convective warnings. Remember, this was part of the TOTS talk, and so this is what was of particular interest to them. And so these are how these 4 tiers kind of shake out for our severe convective warning area of expertise. So novice, again, that's going to be new to the job. These individuals are either currently enrolled in or have recently completed RAC. They're not locally warning certified, and they've just begun some of the more advanced training. For proficient, these are going to be people that are locally warning certified, so they can sit on the radar desk and issue warnings without having somebody really having to look over their shoulder especially closely. These are typically GS 11 or higher. They have completed RAC, they have enrolled in or completed walk, they've completed all SWIP training, and they've completed all local severe weather training. As you're getting into advanced, we tried to come up with some metrics to make this as objective as possible. Ultimately, this is a subjective process, and so we wanted to try to put some things on there. And so after going back and looking at warning statistics for our office over the last several years, these are some numbers that we came up with to kind of help, I guess, pick out some of our more advanced individuals. And so we're looking for people with at least 4 years of experience after warning certification. The warning meteorologists for more than 10 events have issued more than 100 severes and more than 10 tornado warnings. These folks consistently apply a sound warning decision-making process. They apply SWIP training and other advanced level warning concepts. They help the SUE develop local training, and they also mentor lower tiered staff. And then finally, our experts. These are individuals with at least 5 years of experience after warning certification. They've been the warning met for over 20 events. They've issued 125 severes and over 20 tornado warnings. They've mastered SWIP training and other advanced level warning concepts and regularly apply this warning decision-making process. They accurately design and deliver severe weather case reviews, and they actively promote advanced level warning concepts and information. I rely on, in my office, my experts and my advanced folks to help me, for example, proctor West training and do things like that. And so we tried to put together pretty stringent criteria for what identifies somebody as advanced or expert. And for example, in our office, we actually only have one severe convective warning expert. And after today, actually, we'll have 0 severe weather convective warning experts because that individual is retiring. And so we're trying to find ways to help people move up these tiers, but we really want to make sure that this expert title means something. And so we're really trying to hold people to a high standard on this. The next step is determine when these subject matter experts are going to be utilized. And so we came up with this usage guidance. It's largely based on the SPC convective outlooks, very similar to how our trigger charts work. There's obviously room here for forecasters to kind of adjust things if they don't 100% agree with the outlook that SPC has us in. But you can see as you go from left to right, we go from higher to lower end severe weather events. And all the letters that you see, E is expert, A is advanced, P is proficient, N is novice. And you can see for our high and our moderate events, we essentially want as many expert and advanced people in the on the warning desk or in the warning assistant role as possible. And then as you kind of shift on down, that's where you can start introducing people with lower levels of expertise into the warning decision-making process. One thing I guess I should probably clarify here, the way our office typically handles convective warnings are with warning teams, where we have a warning meteorologist and a warning assistant sitting side by side at the same workstation, one of them on GR, one of them on AWIPS, making those decisions. And then oftentimes we'll have two warning teams going. This is when we kind of sectorize, and so we'll have as many as 4 meteorologists involved in the warning decision-making process. And so this is kind of our usage matrix for our severe convective warnings. And then the fourth step, and probably the most complicated step, is to develop schedule flexibility to ensure that subject matter experts are available to work impactful events without degrading work-life balance. This is, of course, a work in progress, and as I mentioned, one of the biggest barriers to this actually working. The schedule is obviously pretty constraining, and we've already got most of our meteorologists working a very difficult schedule. And when I gave this presentation just, like 3 months ago, that's gotten even more complicated. On top of that, having a consistent routine helps a lot of our METs deal with the rigors of our schedule. And if this idea is taken too far, this paradigm could really screw that consistency up for people that rely on that. We're also limited by the constraints of the CBA, and then given, again, all the uncertainty around our present situation, scheduling is just going to continue to get difficult. And so what we've tried to do is just ask our staff to be as flexible as they can and look for relatively painless options to get our expert and advanced staff into the office when needed. Maybe this looks like swapping days with evenings, being more flexible on shift start times. We're certainly still kind of feeling this out, and I'm sure that's going to continue as we figure out whatever our new normal is as we move into the future. And then finally, the fifth step is to provide continuing education, specialized training, and increased operational exposure to help meteorologists move into that advanced or expert tier. And so these are, people going back and reviewing events that they issued warnings on, perhaps. We've had a lot of events this spring, and that's something I've tried to encourage all of our budding experts to go back and look at what they did, or come and talk to me and sit down and we can go through their warning decision process and say, what they did well, what could have gone better, helping me develop training for the staff, radar case reviews, things like that. We don't have a real specific plan for what exactly this looks like, but just encouraging these folks to be as invested in developing their expertise as possible. So I was pretty excited to actually be able to put this into practice this spring, and I think we had a really great case, and it worked out really well. So this is going back to the March 14th outbreak. And you can see we had pretty advanced lead time. Obviously we were outlooked well before day 3, but you can see starting on day 3, much of our CWA was in an enhanced. We got upgraded to a moderate on day 2, and then we stayed in that moderate that expanded on day 1, where essentially our entire CWA was in that moderate. And so we had some time to kind of look at the schedule and see how things were going to be planned out. So here's a look at our schedule. Obviously, I've taken the names all off, but I have highlighted where our expert is, where our advanced individuals are at, and then all of our proficient meteorologists. I've also put kind of a star and highlighted our proficient meteorologists that have indicated they're interested in moving into that advanced and eventually expert tier. And so these are the people that we're trying to get on shift for this event. You can see March 14th is highlighted there in red. So our expert is on an H. 2 of our advanced folks are going to be around during the day. But our proficient individuals that are interested in advancing, one of them is supposed to be off and coming on midnight shifts on Friday night, and another one is on leave. And so that's a bit of a problem. And we wanted to try to figure out a way that we can handle this. So because we had such a long lead time on this event coming up, we were able to kind of ask around and see who was willing to, if anybody was willing to move some things around. And fortunately, we had one of our proficient meteorologists who has not indicated a great deal of desire to move into these advanced and expert tiers. They were actually willing to take on a midnight shift to help one of our proficient meteorologists come in and work the severe weather event. We also decided to, on one of these midnight shifts, just single staff it. And so that's something else that our staff has been willing to be flexible on. And that allowed that proficient meteorologist, who is also one of our experts in storm surveys, to go out and work quite a few storm surveys and help us do that. Because I think we were doing that for like 4 days. So here's what we ended up with our warning teams. Warning team 1, we had one of our proficient meteorologists who's developing expertise paired with our expert. And then we had another one of our proficient meteorologists paired with an advanced individual. And I think this event worked out really quite well for us. Here are some statistics that I just quickly pulled off of IEM Cow this morning. You can see we did have a false alarm ratio of 50%, but all things considered, that's really not too bad. Our POD was 83%, so pretty good. And then if you look at our strong tornadoes, we did have 3 EF3s, 4 EF0s. We didn't miss any of them. And our average lead time was 25 minutes for the EF3s and 21 minutes for the EF2s. Now, obviously, this is just one event, and so we're definitely talking about small sample sizes here. But I was really pretty pleased with how this kind of paradigm played out in our office. And so that's pretty much all that I've got. But I just wanted to kind of share what we're working on. I feel pretty strongly that developing subject matter expertise has got to be the way forward for our agency. Personally, I'm pretty excited by what the plan is with the SUE program in general, where we're going to be able to leverage and put our SUEs into areas that they are experts in, that they're passionate about, and then how they can kind of spread that around to the different offices and share their knowledge where it needs to be shared. So, and I'm really looking forward to see how this kind of gets expanded to the agency at large. So I'll go ahead and wrap up there. And like I said, I'll be happy to take any questions if anybody's got them.
All right, thanks, guys. If you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand or type that in the chat, and I can read it for you. And just, Aaron, go ahead.
Good morning. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Great presentation, guys. I've actually kind of, as you know, I created a CERT team or CERT process several years ago, and I evolved it over to an advanced radar technique, and followed very similar to what you have been. The one thing I have found, and some of this was also through the OPG convective warning mutual aid, is that I had to provide very specific objective metrics to define, you know, who are the experts. Just because I had a lot of people that thought they were, you know, batting 1,000 and they struggled and came to realize, well, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. And so with, you know, we've already lost 2 or 3 people that I'm putting through a process. So I was curious to hear, you know, if you've got, you know, for example, I kind of used the concept you had with Google Forms and just both displace real time and self-paced cases and had them automatically score them. And if they weren't, you know, getting to a certain score level, then, you know, maybe this wasn't for them. So I was curious to hear what type of process you're using, because that is one of the outcomes from the OPG tests, was to have, you know, rather than just saying, hey, you're 5+ years in, do you actually show that? Because I have a lot of people that have 20+ years and they're nowhere near the top. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, that's certainly an excellent question, and it's something that we were pretty concerned about coming into it. I think in a few ways our office is a little bit unique. One of them is we have just an unquestioned expert in our office. You know, Fred Glass has been around for a long time, and I don't think anybody here doubts that he is a severe warning expert, and so that was not a difficult sell. But outside of Fred, we have a lot of younger folks in our office, and so I think there's a lot of willingness to accept, like, hey, we still have a lot to learn. And so we tried to be as delicate as we could about this, but essentially it was kind of those requirements that I laid out earlier, and then it was largely up to me and Fred in this instance to kind of put people into individual places. Part of what's difficult about trying to be objective and trying to put metrics on this is, as we all know, you could issue very scientifically sound tornado warnings that just don't verify. Either we don't get reports, or for one reason or another, they don't produce a tornado warning. Now, ultimately, that I guess that's what matters. But there's just it gets very complicated to kind of be too objective about it. And so I think we kind of lucked out in some ways that our office was more or less willing to go along with it. As far as I know, nobody was, put in a tier that they felt like they should not have been in. But I can certainly see how that could be difficult in a lot of instances. I don't know if Ryan's got anything to add.
Well, I'll just add too, with the Google form, you do definitely will have some people that are more humble, and we have just John and I, when we were picking these teams, we knew who we wanted as sort of the leads and the more advanced people on these teams. And you have to be careful with that, because some of them are going to say, I'm not that good. Yeah, you are. You are really good at what you're doing. And so we had to sort of push through that barrier. As far as the stats, we were looking, like I said, we were keeping up with the false alarm stats. It's not really easy to do the POD stats because there's no easy way to gain that metric, except for knowing after an event, how many events did you have where you had to ask those questions, why didn't we? And so we would keep track of which of those events were going on, John and I, to be able to help out with inform the decisions. I did want to point out one thing, if you did notice it with Ben's group, that he had the advanced and he had the expert as the assistant, and he had the proficient person as the one issuing those warnings. So that does help to get into that level, to get them some experience issuing the severes and the tours, to help get to that metric level that he's talking about. And I also wanted to point out one thing that Kevin Laws did. I think it helped with the stats, the number of forecasters that he had in the office, was he would actually, during an event, have a forecaster sitting in another room gaining experience, and he would watch over their shoulders as they issued in practice mode the warnings. So you could be real time in an event, not hearing what the others are doing, but be able to use that as a way to measure some success on how they're doing and gaining proficiency. I wish we could do that, but just with the short staffing we have, we can't. That would be the ideal, to be able to get somebody in the hot seat and to see what decisions they would make.
Yeah, that's right, John. He's got a lot more people to throw at that.
He may not now. Who knows? I haven't talked to him, but yeah.
So yeah, Brian brought up a great point, that we have been trying to use our expert and advanced folks in that assistant role a lot. I think just about every event we've had this year, at least big event, we've had Fred sitting in an assistant role, just trying to get as much knowledge out of him and onto our again, budding experts as possible. I have found myself in the warning assistant role a lot since moving into the SUE role, because that is an opportunity for me to kind of guide some of our folks who are trying to develop that expertise. So that's been, I think, kind of a doubly beneficial thing. You've got two people looking at radar when you deploy this warning assistant, making these warning decision-making processes. But then two, you're kind of passing knowledge from your more expert individuals to those that are developing that expertise. Go ahead, John.
Hey, I was just going to hit on that same point. Having the expert in the assistant mode with our cyclic supercell event we just had this past Sunday, we had 75% of our forecast staff in. Of course, that's only 6 people. But as it turns out, the person who started issuing the tornado warnings was kind of that same type of proficient star kind of person. And I actually served to start with as the meso person. And I was working with Katie McGee, who was our RMA specialist that day. So that train of information and knowledge then worked through this other person who is primarily doing the warnings. So that can't be overlooked. The importance of having, not that I'm that much of an expert, but just having that person as a second set of eyes. And then we had one of our other subject matter experts come in a little bit later and do kind of that same role. So yeah, I was just going to hit on that same point. Great talk, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
All right. Do we have any additional questions? All right. If not, thanks again to both of you for presenting today. This will conclude our Innovation Spotlight for today. And if you do have additional questions, I'm sure you could reach out to Ben and or Ryan at any time after the presentation. The recording should be available here in a couple days. We'll get that posted on YouTube and we'll send out the link when it's available. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jenny.